Hello everybody, PLO Professor here. Thank you guys for tuning in. I really debated for a long time on making a video on live tells. And the reason why is because one of the things that GTO charts don't explain is live reads. When I coach students, one of the things that I coach them on is the difference between variance and good play. So for example, if I have a student that comes to me and they say, hey, Professor, I lost $2,000 last week. Here's a bunch of hand history reviews. And they show me a hand like Jack, XX, and the flop is like Jack, 8, 3, and they get it all in against, 9, 10, Queen, and the runout's like a 7 and then a 4, and they go, see, I played really good, I lost. I actually have a lot of students who will point out how they got it all in with the best hand and that they lost. One of the things I stress to my students is if you get it all in with top set versus a wrap or top set versus a flush draw and you end up losing, that's what we call variance, okay? The difference between a really good poker player and an amazing poker player is going to be good play. And what do I mean by good play? I mean by making good reads and good calls when you get to the river or when you get to the flop or whatever the case may be. So in this episode, one of the things I'm going to talk about is live reads. So this is a video all on live reads. Now I want you guys to understand some of these live reads are going to apply to both No Limit Hold'em and Pot Limit Omaha, and some of these reads are going to apply just to Pot Limit Omaha. Now I'm going to give you the most common live reads, and then I'm going to go into more detailed live reads. And then there's going to be two different sections of live reads. There's going to be bet sizing of live reads and what bet sizing can mean. And then there's just going to go straight off a live read. Something they did. Okay? Now, live reads. Professor, what's the most common tell? You guys have seen the movie Rounders where, if your opponents look strong, they're weak, and if they try to act weak, they look strong. That's kind of like a basic read. What I want to tell you is some of the live reads that you end up getting directly off of people, and some of the most common ones. So the very first read, and I tell this to all my students, when you see the flop come out, and first of all, let me make a disclaimer right here. I apologize to all the poker professionals across the board on having a video on just live reads. I know Mike Caro did a book of tells. It's a little outdated, but some of it still applies today. But these are live reads. I've never read Mike Caro's book of tells. I saw some funny pictures. These are live reads based off of 16, 17 years of experience. And if you're really doing poker professionally, or if you're considering to do it professionally, the difference in live reads can be the difference in you being a profitable player, a break-even player, or a losing player. What is the most common live read? The most common live read is when a player looks at their chips. I cannot stress this enough. If you're playing poker at any kind of serious level, and when the flop comes out, if you're looking at the cards, you're doing it wrong. That's right. You're doing it wrong. There's nothing else I can tell you. You're just doing it wrong. You should not be looking at the flop until the action's on you. You should gather as much information as you possibly can on your opponents prior to your action. And you should give off the least amount of information to your opponents prior to your action. And the reason why that's important is because if you look at the flop before the action's on you, and then you glance down at your chips, that's a tell. Why is looking at chips a live read? Subconsciously, and myself included, I've done this from time to time. I've even done it in the last week. I do it at least once or twice a session, and I catch myself doing it, and it drives me nuts. But if you know you have a monster, like you have a monster like ace, jack, 10 double suited, and you're in a 3-bet pot, and you feel that your opponent either has a rundown or like pocket kings or pocket aces, even though you have an ace, and the flop comes something like jack, 9. Subconsciously, you look down at your chips when you know that you've smashed the flop because you subconsciously think to yourself, how many of these chips can I get in the middle of the pot? Subconsciously, your opponents do that as well. Even if they're trained, seasoned professionals, sometimes I'll catch them from time to time when the flop comes out, action gets on them, they'll look at the flop and they'll look down at their chips immediately. Now I know what some of you guys are saying. Professor, if I'm playing against you, can't I just look down at my chips every single time? And that's gonna give you a misread? Maybe, perhaps, if you do it the exact same way every time you have a hand and every time you don't have a hand. But the number one most common live read is when the flop comes out and a player looks down at their chips. Period, end of story. That's it, that's the whole video. Have a nice one. Okay, no, seriously. But when a player looks down at their chips, it signifies strength. It signifies subconsciously that they want to get as many of those chips in the pot. If a player sees the flop and they don't look down at their chips, and instead they're just looking at their cards or looking around, then you have to pick up on some other live tells. What are some of these other live tells? So we have look at chips. That's literally the most common one. Number two, how do you tell if somebody's excited? Again, people are playing at the table, they see a flop, the person's sitting directly to your right, they bet out a big amount, and you're trying to figure out, what does this person have? Does this person have something that they're really excited about, that they're, definitely going to continue on? Are they bluffing? Something that I found, and I know this sounds really weird, this is a physiology thing. Again, if you go back to look at like FBI analysts, people who are live lie detectors besides poker players, they have all these different tells that they read on people's faces, okay? When somebody's really excited, their jugular vein, which I believe is right here, on the left side, will beat really fast, okay? And you can actually see it. You can see the vein popping out of their neck, particularly if they're directly to your right. And I know this sounds weird. People, when they play against me, sometimes they look at me awkwardly, especially if they're directly to my right, because if the action's on them, I'm staring at them, and I'm right next to them. I'm just staring at them. They make a bet, look them up and down, read them. Keep in mind, this is if I'm continuing in a hand, if I have something worth continuing or worth raising. A hand that's just folding, why waste the time? Just move on to the next hand. But for the most part, if you're sitting next to me or across the table, I found it ironic that a lot of people feel awkward when they're staring at other people. When you're a professional poker player, you should be observing your opponents, because the difference between variance and good play is being able to make a call with a straight when there's a flush on the board, or being able to make a call with a flush when there's a full house on the board, when there's a board that's paired. Those are good calls. Being able to recognize weakness, and when you can pick up pots, the difference of $100 or $200 here and there can be the difference in good play. When you're going for really thin value and you read that your opponents are a little weak, you can bet for thin value, or you can pot it and bluff them off of a hand to get the pot. That's gonna be good play. So the number two way you can tell is excitement. And usually people will try controlling their breathing. I'm sure you guys have sat there where somebody's gone all in at $700 and they're like, and they're trying to control their breathing, so they're and they're not moving their mouth or anything like that. Yeah, usually they're pretty excited, and if you're excited, it's because you have a monster. On the flip side, that's why you see a lot of players wear hoodies. They'll even wear face masks that protect their neck. You'll see people do this, especially in the higher stakes, because they know the little jugular vein is right here. You see it. You're always wondering, why is that guy grab his hoodie and he goes like this? It's because of excitement. Sometimes you just can't hide the excitement. And some people do it every single hand when they're in a hand, which is good, because then you can't tell when they're excited and when they're not excited by looking at their jugular vein. You just have to look at other things, okay? And then this is gonna be an easy one. For anybody who's been playing poker for any length of time, they know that this one's true. But especially if you're dealing with a recreational player or a non-professional player, stares away from you and the table, from everything. So Bob goes all in, Bob's the farmer. You're sitting there, you're staring at Bob. You're like, God, I watched the professor's video. I need to get a tell on this guy. And you're just eyeballing him the whole time, just staring at him. And the guy stares away and he doesn't move and he just stares. He's got a monster. Generally speaking, you're gonna find this with inexperienced players, that if they have a monster, looking at the table, looking at you, looking at everything makes them feel uncomfortable, so they pick a spot on the wall and they just stare at it like a deer in headlights. And then they try not to move. So this is number 3 when it comes to live reads. Number 4, this is gonna be a hit or miss. And what I say by hit or miss, years ago, I think this was a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, Matt Berkey, who I have a lot of respect for, talked about chip shufflers and people who are chip shufflers. And I know this sounds weird, but if I am playing against somebody who I'm aware that or if I have an idea that they like Berkey or they listen to Berkey and they listen to his advice, which by the way, his advice is amazing. It's great. I'm not throwing him under the bus at all. I would not do that. But one of the things that Berkey talks about is chip shuffling. When a player is shuffling their chips and they make a big bet and they continue to shuffle their chips with precise precision, they have a monster. And I hate to say this, but a lot of that's true. When they miss-shuffle their chips and they have like a stack of 12 chips and the next thing you know, 6 or 8 chips fall out of the stack, it usually means they're bluffing, okay? So perfectly stacked chips while they're shuffling, perfectly shuffling, monster, and if they miss, that means they're bluffing. Now, the reason why I tell you this, and something I will tell you, one of my tells might be chip shuffling, because I shuffle chips nonstop. But I will tell you, when I'm in a monster pot, I will purposefully mix in messing up my chips while I'm shuffling when I have a monster and when I'm bluffing. I know that sounds really weird, but if I'm against a player that I feel I know has listened to Berkey and the chip shuffling thing, I'm generally going to implement a few, oops, my chips shuffled. The other thing that you can do, and again, when you're playing against a professional poker player, they know some of these tendencies, okay, when it comes to live reads. And if they're really smart or if they're really good, they're going to use those tendencies against you, okay? And what do I mean by that? Number 5, the person just looks uncomfortable. Now I know what you're saying. Professor, that's easy. You know, somebody just looks uncomfortable. Not really. Somebody bets $500 into a $1,000 pot. You're sitting there, you're reading them. You're like, there's a paired board, but I have the nut flush. Are they bluffing? Are they not bluffing? If I'm the person who has the nut full house, I am going to do everything I can in my power to look so uncomfortable while you're trying to call, if I want you to call. I will purposefully mind fuck you. That's because I'm a professional poker player and I'm aware of tells. Now, what do you do to look uncomfortable? You can like look around, you can look at the chip stack, especially if it starts going deep in the tank. Instead of staring off in the distance in one thing, you stare off in the distance and you just kind of glance over the room, and then you shuffle your chips, and then your chips accidentally slide over. I'll give every single tell in the world of I'm uncomfortable, even though I have the nuts, just to get you to call. Because sometimes opponents will try reading you, and if you can get them to misread and misstep, even better. And they'll end up calling you, and that's called good play. Believe it or not, looking uncomfortable can be the difference in making you thousands of dollars during a session or having a losing session any day of the week. Okay? So these are the primary things. The other thing, again, this goes back to somebody who's a little inexperienced, but they talk a lot. And not just a lot, they just talk nonstop. If somebody's in a hand and they bet all in and you're sitting there going in the tank and they start talking to you, or they're talking to their buddy and they're really excited and they talk, people who tend to talk a lot, generally speaking, have really strong hands. Now on the flip side, if you're playing against somebody that you know is a known pro and they're talking a lot during the hand, you have to be cautious. They might have the tendency of talking a lot when they have a monster, but they also might be doing like a reverse psychology, so you have to keep that in mind. Now, again, these are the 6 primary things on live tells. As I told you, there's 2 different types of tells. There's physical live tells, and there are more, but if you can master these 6 live tells here, you're going to start having better play in your game versus variance. So that you're going to have situations where somebody bets pot, you're staring at them, they're a little bit of a new player, and they're staring off in the distance, and you're like, well, I remember that thing that the professor said when I watched a couple weeks ago, this guy must have a monster, and you muck it. At the same time, somebody's being real quiet, they look uncomfortable, you can be like, I'm going to call, or I'm going to raise if I have to, just in case my calling hand is not valued enough to withstand a standard bet. So these are the live reads. There's also reads that are sizing, chip stack sizing. What do I mean by that? I don't mean like somebody puts out a stack of chips and they don't care and they push it in, even though that is another live tell. I had a gentleman down in Columbus the other day where there was a flush on the board. The board was ace queen XXX. I had ace king, and I had one spade in my hand. There was 3 spades on the board, and the gentleman bet 140 on the turn. I called him because my tell told me he was full of shit. And on the river, he grabbed a stack of green, and then he grabbed a stack of red, and then he grabbed another stack of red, so it looked like a huge monster stack, and he pushed it right over the line, and I called him. As he pushed it over the line, I said, call. And it was good. It was a $350 bet or so on the river with just 2 pair, with a flush being out there on the board, and it was good. And that's the difference in good play and variance, okay? And part of my read was when the guy just kept stacking chips, I knew he didn't have it. And the reason why, again, in pot limit Omaha, one of the big tells is the river comes and the guy just says pot. Why? Because they don't give a fuck what pot is if they have the nuts, because they know they can't lose. But if they know they can lose, then they're gonna vary their bet sizing as in a just in case I get called bet, okay? And sometimes they'll stack a big stack of chips and throw it in there to try looking strong when in fact they're weak. So that is another live read. Now when it comes to chip stack sizing, and this is gonna apply primarily in pot limit Omaha versus no limit hold'em, generally speaking, what I just said holds true. If your opponent has the nuts on the river, unless they're a very experienced pot limit Omaha player like myself, they are generally, when they're bluffing, not going to bet pot. One of the things I teach my students is when in doubt, pot it out. You get to the river and you're not sure if you're good and it's checked to you, bet pot and just say pot with confidence. And the reason why is because if you have the nuts again, you don't care if the pot is $20,000, you can't lose. You know, whereas if there's $2,000 in the pot and you don't have the nuts and you're doing like a bluff or a semi-bluff, you might go, well, I'm probably gonna bet somewhere around 1/3 to 2/3 pot size bet on PLO tends to be a bluff. Tends to be a bluff. And I can't stress this enough. So this past weekend I was at the Wynn, and I had a gentleman where the board was paired, and he ended up betting $400 into like a $1,100 pot. And the board was paired, and I had the nut flush, and he had position on me, and he did have $1,100 behind. And when he bet $400, I went in the tank, and I'm like, is this person a good enough PLO player that they're just trying to squeeze value out of me? Or are they a little bit more amateurish, and they're just betting enough on the pot that they don't want me to call, but they want to be scary by betting a significant amount? I ended up calling, and I was good. So these are the different ways that you can have live reads. I hope this video has found you guys in good spirits. I'm sure there's more live reads than that. Please let me know in the comments down below what else you've had for live reads. Play smart, everybody. Run like a god.